What if I told you that Ferrari has built a car so misleading that his own simulator did not detect a structural error that could now cost the championship? What is really happening within the SF-25? During the first free sessions in Albert Park, trust began to crumble. At first glance, the car seemed competitive, but the times did not arrive. What the simulator promised in Maranello did not materialize on the Australian track. The disconnection between virtual data and real sensations was the first symptom of a much deeper disease. An invisible crack in the eyes of superficial analysis, but increasingly evident for engineers and, above all, for pilots. Charles Leclerc, always meticulous in his comments, began to drop phrases with double bottom on radios and conferences. The car feels different in each curve, does not respond as in the tests, were subtle messages that betrayed their frustration. But it was Hamilton who, with his experience, hit the table. After Australia's GP, he openly admitted that the car was unpredictable, and that, in the mouth of a pilot with more than 300 large awards behind him, it was not a simple complaint. It was an alarm signal. The drop that filled the glass came in China. In a race where management and stability were key, the SF-25 showed its worst face. Unstable in braking, erratic in traction, and dangerously ineffective in rapid curves. Hamilton was disqualified by excessive wear of the flat background, a direct consequence of a car that needs to shoot too low to compensate for its structural defects. Disqualification was not only a sports sanction, but a technical confirmation that something was deeply bad. When talking about a Formula One car, the problem is rarely in a single component. Everything is a millimetrically connected ecosystem, where each failure is multiplied in cascade by the rest of the set. And that is precisely what makes the structural failure of the SF-25 so worrying. The rear suspension, which traditionally acts as the system that absorbs loads, stabilizes the car in accelerations and curves, and allows engineers to finally adjust the dynamic behavior of the car, has become the root of all Ferrari evils this year. The problem is not simply a broken piece or a poorly tight specification. What they have discovered in Maranello is a design defect in the kinematics of the rear suspension, that is, in how their components are articulated, how the forces are transferred, and how it responds to geometry changes during the movement. This lack of rigidity completely compromises the car's ability to maintain a constant driving height. In practical terms, that means that SF-25 is unable to keep its aerodynamic platform stable. And if something defines the performance of a modern Formula One car, it is precisely the stability of that platform under all possible conditions: braking, accelerations, rapid curves, slope changes. Ferrari had opted for an architecture of traction rods, a configuration that, if it runs well, allows a quick response and a reduced weight. But what the team did not foresee was that the anchor points of this configuration were not sufficiently resistant to the lateral loads generated in high-speed curves. In a circuit like Shanghai, where lateral transitions and prolonged support are current currency, this weakness was brutally exposed. The car behaves erratically, changing its balance from one turn to another. This forces pilots to drive in a permanent state of uncertainty, which undermines their trust return after. For a pilot like Hamilton, accustomed to having an almost instinctive connection with the machine, this disconnection represents an unprecedented emotional and technical challenge. Leclerc, meanwhile, has tried to adapt with changes in its braking style, but the results have been equally disappointing. And as if that were not enough, this structural weakness has forced Ferrari to modify other areas of the car to try to compensate. The flat fund, for example, is being forced to work closer to the ground than it should. This increases friction, wear, and, eventually, causes sanctions to breach the technical regulations. We already saw it in the China GP, where Hamilton was disqualified by an excess of wear in the plank, the famous wooden bar that regulates the minimum height of the car with respect to the ground. But that's not all. Another critical component that has been dragged by this failure is the assisted management system. In theory, it should not have a direct relationship with the suspension, but in practice, having such an unstable car, the hydraulic assistance system is forced to correctly correct. In high-speed curves, where the pilot needs precise and stable feedback, this system responds with contradictory signals, which adds even more uncertainty to driving. And then there are the brakes. Hamilton brutally described it honestly, a lottery, because compounds and braking systems do not work in a consistent way when the car constantly changes high in balance. In a few laps they work perfectly, and in others they simply disappear. This not only affects pure performance but security. And when a team reaches the point of having to implement strategies such as the lift and coast, lift the foot of the accelerator before curves to refrigerate the brakes, it is a sign that the situation has exceeded all the limits of the acceptable. Ferrari is now with a technical dilemma of huge proportions. To resolve the failure, they should redesign, manufacture, homologate, and test a new suspension system, something that cannot be done overnight in full season. The question that floats in the air is, to what extent can they live with this defect? And what are they willing to sacrifice in the meantime? The discovery of the structural failure in the rear suspension of the SF-25 is not just a technical setback. It is a deep fracture in the heart of Ferrari's 2025 project. And its implications, both in the sports and strategic level, are colossal. The current Formula One does not allow base errors, because the budget rules, the development tokens limit, and the limited wind tunnel time make each false step cost months of lost performance. Ferrari, with this ruling, has not only lost ground, he has mortgaged his own reaction capacity. To begin with, the margin of development in full season is minimal. Redesigning a complete suspension implies redrawing part of the monocoque, which requires passing through extremely strict and expensive approval processes. It is not just about changing pieces, it's about altering the car architecture. And that, under the current technical regulations, can even put the fulfillment of the budgetary ceiling in check. Vasseur knows it. The technical department also knows. And the worst part is that everyone knows that any radical correction probably does not arrive before the summer break, leaving Ferrari exposed for half-season. At the championship level, this has already had devastating effects. Ferrari started the year with the ambition to fight for the title of builders. But with McLaren consolidated as the technical reference, Mercedes recovering competitiveness, and Red Bull solving their own internal crises with Verstappen as spearhead, Ferrari has lost the train. Not only at points but in confidence. And in Formula One, morality is as important as aerodynamics. Lewis Hamilton, who arrived in Maranello as the star signing, has had to face a nightmare situation. In Mercedes, even in his worst moments, Hamilton had a solid team, capable of offering a predictable and technically coherent machine. In Ferrari, however, an indomitable car has been found. His adaptation process, which thought it would be fast because of his vast experience, has been frustrated by the chaotic nature of SF-25. And when a pilot does not trust the behavior of his car, that distrust is transferred to each curve, each braking, every decision on the track. For someone like Hamilton, accustomed to excellence, this can become a psychological load of tremendous proportions. Charles Leclerc, meanwhile, is not better. It has been carrying the Ferrari flag for years, with promises of evolution that never come to be completed at all. Its frustration, although more publicly contained, is equally deep. He has had to change his driving style to compensate for car problems, but is constantly limited by a platform that does not allow him to exploit his abilities. And when the pilot begins to drive against the car, the result is usually a spiral of errors, overcompensation, and lack of consistency. The structural failure of the SF-25 has exposed much more than an engineering error. He has undressed the fragility of the entire system that supports the Scuderia in the modern era. And that's why the inevitable question arises. Is this the beginning of the end for Ferrari as a real contender to the title? And that is exactly what it feels at this time. The SF-25 was built under the promise of a new beginning, of an era in which Ferrari would not only compete, but would dominate. But what has emerged is a contradictory car, with a broken identity between the simulator and the track. Vasseur has given his face honestly, but that has also made it clear that not even technical leadership has an immediate solution. Emotional, the impact on the pilots is almost irreversible. Hamilton arrived in Maranello not only for history, but for the ambition to close his career at the top. I wanted the 8th title, yes, but I also wanted to enjoy running again. Today, that desire is obscured by the frustration of a car that does not respond. Leclerc, on the other hand, feels that every year lost is a chance to achieve the glory that was promised since he was promoted to the Scuderia. If this season continues downhill, the narrative will be invested. The future Ferrari champion will no longer be Leclerc, but the talent that could never achieve it because of a wandering car. But perhaps the most disturbing is the lack of certainty to the future. Can the SF-25 be fixed with a mid-season modification? Possibly not without compromising the base structure of the car. Are there resources to completely redesign chassis? On paper, yes, but the budget limits complicate everything. What happens if this situation extends until 2026, the year in which all teams begin to redirect their development towards the new regulations? Ferrari could be trapped in a technical limbo, without competing in the present or being ready for the future. That is why this crisis cannot be seen only as a passenger error. It has all the signs of a turning point. Ferrari has two paths ahead: to face the crisis with a radical restructuring in its technical department, adopting an aggressive redesign strategy that assumes short-term losses to ensure one resurgence in 2026, or resign itself to another cycle of mediocrity, trying to turn off fires instead of reinventing itself.